most recent Blizzard interview is absolutely crazy, as we learned that the entire saga storyline was actually supposed to happen in this expansion of War Within, and this might have wrapped up World of Warcraft as we know it. Then Chris Metzen returned, realized this could turn out to be a fiasco, and they can't tell this much storyline in a single expansion, so they decided to build 3 instead. It's likely that originally Rootlands was supposed to be a part of the release patch, 11.1 was supposed to be midnight content related to Karesh, and 11.2, the ultimate finale, would be what would be the last Titan content. Instead, all of this was moved. This entire expansion was completely improvised. I mean, they recycled a BFA map, which explains why everything kind of feels so disjointed so far. So what is all this new information that we've learned from the Blizzard panel, and what really is the War Within? What if former Blizzard developers built a game that is like a mix of Dark Souls and Tarkov? Well, you will get Legacy, Steel and Sorcery, a super cool fantasy PvP PvE game. To put it simply, this game is as hardcore as it gets. You drop in with your loadout, explore dark and dangerous dungeons, fight monsters, and of course, most importantly, other players, and if you survive, you get the loot, but if you die, you lose everything. Best of all, you can choose your own playstyle, so a full-on glass cannon wizard, a beefy frontline warrior, or a sneaky rogue. Each class has a deep skill tree, gear upgrades, as well as a steep skill curve, requiring quite a bit of strategy to be able to win. There are solo, duo, and trio modes, but of course the higher the stakes, the bigger the loot. Even better, new seasons drop every 3 months. First one is live right now with 3 new maps, a brand new wizard class, and a ton of content. Right now the game is 25% off until May 22nd, so if you're into brutal PvP, PvE, and big loot moments, check out Legacy, Steel and Sorcery right now with my link in the description below. Interesting enough, based on the recent interviews, it appears that the pre-patch for Midnight is going to be coming by the end of this year, which means that Midnight is likely coming out somewhere around January 2026, which is crazy fast, and this most importantly means that the War Within is literally wrapping up in just a few months, making this the most fast-paced WoW expansion we've ever really had. Now, let's be completely real, I mean, so far nothing really crazy has happened in terms of the main storyline in this expansion. I mean, sure, we got a ton of new lore, ton of new world-changing, lore-breaking information, but that all really is a setup for the future. But in regards to the main storyline itself, we got a few filler, like more evergreen-like patches, and the story barely even moved since we arrived to Kanzagar at the start of Zeltet, destroyed the Alaram, Alleria broke the Dark Heart, Zeltet got the goblins to fix it, and now the Ethereals have stolen it, but that is really it. I mean, really nothing crazy, and a lot of the story has been said to be filler by the community, and looks like the community was actually right, because we did get a PAX WoW panel where this was more or less like soft confirmed by Blizzard themselves, as they gave us insight into the behind the scenes of how a single expansion turned into a 3 expansion saga. We've kind of known this intrinsically already, that the return of Chris Metzen was a huge crossroads for Blizzard and World of Warcraft, as they fired most of the previous lore team, made some giant changes to everything. Chris Metzen himself said in the interview last year on the official WoW channel that he came to WoW when they were already finalizing and building the War Within, and they had a lot of work to steer the ship in a different direction to actually build the saga. This change made the War Within really feel super disjointed, because you might have actually noticed this if you've been playing the expansion, because let's be real, I mean, the story so far doesn't make much sense just from a geographical perspective, amongst other things. I mean, the World Soul Saga opens with the Sword of Sargeras on Kalimdor in Silitus, then we are in some random underground zone called Kanzagar, after that we're going to Quatalaus, the Eastern Kingdoms, after that we're going to Northrend. Well, the reason for that is because, as they told us on the panel, this story was all supposed to happen in the War Within. It was all supposed to be contained in this one giant expansion. Very likely Quatalaus and Northrend would never happen, but probably it was all supposed to occur on Kanzagar and everything with Belladar and all this information, and this really kind of makes sense when you look at the patches that we have. We already have what appears to be some cut content that we've kind of data mined, but very likely we were supposed to get 11.0 as the opening of the War Within with the actual Rootland zone and the main content that we currently have. The Rootland zone definitely appears to be cut or modified so far, then very very likely 11.1 was supposed to be Koresh, aka the midnight portion of the story, and 11.2 is the finale of this expansion, very likely supposed to be Last Titan ending that will play on the storyline we got from the Shadowlands. However, luckily for us, I do think Blizzard managed to avoid a huge fiasco here akin to the Shadowlands when Chris Metzen returned, as he said that there is way too much story here to be told in one expansion, and that they should instead just spread it into 3 different expansions as like one giant one with a seamless storyline. Honestly, it does seem like this was indeed the right choice, but in order to do that, they had to do a crazy restructure of the content, and for this, the War Within definitely suffered. For example, if you can see the recent artwork from the concept art studio that I've covered in a few videos, you can see that during Shadowlands, they already hired a studio to figure out this expansion. From the interviews, we know that the Zerlak Caverns in Dragonflight were literally just experiments for the underground expansion, the War Within, and by the time Chris Metzen came, they had already nearly finished the expansion, created all the assets, the storyline and everything. However, on BlizzCon, like a few months later, he told us the next 2 are being worked on, Midnight and the Last Titan, so this kind of came out of nowhere. This implies that this might have just originally been War Within content that was spaced out and just used as a separate expansion. It's very likely that the revamp of Kotalas was never planned or anything to do with the Sunwell, neither was a Northern revamped, but they figured out that these 2 zones and the return to Azeroth would resonate well with the audience. So by creating this space, they now have a ton of room to build full expansions out of this one storyline. However, the main expansion that was dissected to be able to be turned into this saga project definitely ended up suffering, and this explains a bit of the mess that is the War Within, at least up to this point. If you have been following the lore, you have definitely noticed this. This also explains why they're coming up with content so fast. I mean, we're getting new patches like every month or 2, which is absolutely crazy, and that is probably because they had already built this in the past, so they had kind of a backlog to work from. For example, we also recently learned that Undermine was never originally planned, and that the lead game designer Eon requested for them to introduce Undermine, seeing that the expansion is underground based anyway, and this was also heavily requested in the past within the community, but realistically it really has nothing to do with the saga. So all of this kind of explains the randomness of this expansion so far. For example, starts out with the Sword of Sargeras, but it is never mentioned again. Then the first patch makes sense, but it's really not a robust storyline. After that, the next patch is Undermine, where it really does feel like they just shoehorns out that storyline here, and now next is Koresh, most likely, which kind of feels like we're just going from Kalimdor to Northrend to Outland to everything. Like, it doesn't really make all that much sense. Like, why are we going all across the place? Now, if you guys might have remembered, and I've covered this many times in the past, but there is this zone called the Rootlands that was on the original development map. We figured this out a while ago, and it was supposed to be there in the actual release with the Haranir, yet nothing happened so far, and we've been speculating that this would be 11.1 or 11.2. We all know of the World Tree Luna here, Kazakar, and the connections. I've covered this a million times. We've data mined the Haranir ages ago to be super developed. Most of us believed this would be the next Allied Race. Then we actually got them in the official release cinematic, but we have still not gotten that zone yet. It does appear that this was supposed to be a part of the initial release, and it was supposed to be just like a regular zone we would get through in 11.0, and then we would get the big Koresh storyline and a giant void invasion and probably something with Beledar and Zelda's plan finalizing, and all of this would lead us into the ultimate finale in 11.2, which would probably be based in Northrend and the giant world prison and that the Titans built in ancient history. It could potentially be an Order scenario, or it could also be happening in Kazakar, because we figured out the world core is in Kazakar, so we might have never even visited Northrend in the first place. Now, as you would imagine, this would really be the end of World of Warcraft as we know it, as they would pretty much use like 90% of the villains, characters, the content in just this one expansion. We would deal with the Void Lords, we would deal with Xelatat, Titans, conspiracies, pretty much most of the interesting stuff that they have to work with. So it really does appear that Chris Metzen's decision was right, and that this should really be fleshed out further and actually expanded upon and to be a legit storyline. So because of this, I think they now started developing the Arati in the Arati Highlands, as we could see in the newest patch BTR. They started foreshadowing the Emperor, the Light Arati Empire, very likely for the future WoW content, potentially after the saga. Then they brought a whole revamp expansion, which was heavily requested. They decided to do the one patch as a whole expansion, and 11.2 is probably just going to be essentially just like a bridge into Midnight that will explain why we are now suddenly going to the Sunwell. Then they started really foreshadowing the Titan stuff in Kazakar, and even at the end of Dragonflight for the big northern they reveal with Iridikron and the True Titan Goal, which is going to be like the huge finale of this saga, which, as I said, kind of let the first page of the saga better. I mean, they literally just recycled the map from BFA for the first minor patch. It just added some storyline on top of that. Then they added Undermine, which could really be evergreen content, a part of whatever expansion in the future. Now, I think that 11.2 is likely going to be about Karesh, but it will probably be a super watered down version of what it was supposed to be like. I think they probably originally built something with the Ethereals and the Warlords for like the final raid, similar to Antares, but now that we're getting Midnight, this is likely delegated as just a patch zone. So personally, I think we can expect 11.2 to actually be pretty big, as it might have been created as the finale of this giant storyline, but it just ended up becoming a transition patch for Midnight. It will definitely be interesting to see how this actually plays out, as so much stuff has really been built for this expansion, but nothing really happened yet. We got the entire Eluna here, World Tree lore with the Haranir and everything, and something hidden under, potentially Azeroth's actual world soul being in this zone, but in just half a year we're going to the Eastern Kingdoms. Of course, we still got 11.2.5, 11.2.7 to do, so it could introduce the World Tree and a few other things, which could make sense, because it does seem like the second major patch is going to be all about the Ethereals and Karesh. Realistically, Rootlands that we've been talking about for a year now was supposed to be a regular questing zone akin to something like Hellfall, so it could be used for the two minor patches and some content that could fix some loose ends. The only thing that I find super interesting and very realistic is that, as I said, 11.2 could actually be very big. I mean, 11.1 was decently big with you driving in a brand new city, but based on this entire interview, 11.2 content with likely Kadesh was essentially supposed to be like a major expansion finale. I'm talking about a finale that could potentially wrap up World of Warcraft as we know it, so they might have built a seriously big zone akin to Argus, for example, like when we defeated Sargeras at the end of Legion. I mean, that patch back in the day could literally be a mini expansion in itself with how big the zones were, so it's totally realistic that 11.2 could be similar with something crazy happening, and it might not just be like a filler super linear zone akin to an island. Of course, we will have to wait and see though, as it is possible that this content was actually moved for Midnight, so 11.2 could also be improvised as well. Thanks for watching. Check out the fourth questline of the PTR, heavily foreshadowing the Sunwell and what really happened there by clicking on the screen, and check out my second channel for real world history by clicking on the screen as well. See you next time.